So recent reports indicate that Apple may be ditching the Lightning port and going without any sort of charging connector. I'm Jason Cipriani with Jason Perlow, and today we're going to talk about the future of a completely, portless phone. Jason, what do you think?
I'm okay with doing it as long as the functionality that we expect is there, right? So, today we have iPhones that have both wireless charging capabilities as well as direct Lightning port capabilities.
Right.
And it recently became possible for the Lightning port to use USB-C connectivity at the brick level, meaning you can do high speed, high wattage charging with a Lightning connector cable that has USB-C at the other end connected to a brick that supports that, up to 18 watt plus charging capabilities on an iPhone. The max you can do with wireless today with Apple's implementation of Qi is 7.5 watts. Now that's already below what Samsung can do in previous generations with 9 and 10 watt charging and 15 watt charging on the current S10 and Note 10 class. Actually, I think it's only the Note 10 that can do it at 15 watts. I think 10 watts is the max that the S10 can do. So you have limitations as to what the wireless standard can actually accomplish in terms of, one, power transmission, right? And second, heat. And then, of course, you've got the issues with cases and stuff potentially interfering with the connection. I understand why Apple wants to do this. They want to have a sealed box that, one is going to be more water protective, right? Less tamper protective. If it's less tamper protective, it's therefore more user friendly in their regard. Now, this creates a number of issues. There's a huge accessories ecosystem for Lightning connected products. You've got, shutter controls. You have battery cases of Apple's own design. It's a lot of things out there that you need. So removing connectivity from the iPhone, making it wireless only, adds a lot of issues. It completely kills that ecosystem unless you use some type of crazy wireless. I don't know how you would do this. I don't know how it's workable. It's also not workable for developers and end users because you have the entire iTunes manual backup system that's used to restore firmware and personal data and stuff, not on iCloud. How would you do this? Wi-Fi only? Bluetooth, high-speed Bluetooth connection? I don't know, Jason. I'm out of engineering, mentation here.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of challenges and hurdles that Apple will have to solve. Just to back up for a moment, though, the reason this is kind of a topic right now is the New York Times recently covered that the European Union is discussing a new regulation or law or whatever they call it that would require all device makers, electronic makers to use the same connections, same port, same charging cable, essentially, whether it's speakers, smartphones, all of that stuff. And right now, that standard would be USB-C, which I know you've wanted on the iPhone for the last year.
And Apple has already begun sort of baby steps with that with the iPad Pro. Right. And I think that is an excellent thing that they've done. I think it's made the sort of business class and content creation users rather happy with that because it allows for very high speed transfer, very high speed charging, very high wattage. I mean, you can get you need laptop level wattage capabilities on an iPad versus an iPhone, right?
It's crazy. Yeah. So I don't know if what's going to end up happening with that. I know a lot of companies, including Apple, have lobbied against it and said, no, it's going to hurt innovation. It's going to actually lead to more waste because all the cables will be obsolete. Our Lightning standard is pretty common now. So I'm not sure what's going to happen there. But on top of that, an analyst reported that Apple is looking at in 2021 doing the port-free iPhone, which, like you just talked about, there's a lot of issues and a lot of hurdles. How you charge it, how you restore a phone if an update goes sideways and you break it. How do you transfer a huge amount of your music library that you own locally to your phone or a photo library and get videos off of the 4K videos off of your phone? There's a lot of logistics there that Apple would have to figure out. And but I also see some benefits too. One being freeing up that charging port gives Apple more space inside an already tiny housing in order to increase the battery size, maybe add a 20th camera, and not really 20th, but add another camera, another processing unit. Uh, there's other features they could add thanks to just those few extra millimeters of space that are inside the phone.
Well, and I can see why they would want to magnetically charge potentially also, as opposed to QI. I mean, if they went with something like on one of these guys, right? I mean, this is a magnetic connector, right? It is
Right.
not really a pure QI connector. There's a magnetic connection that happens, and it's a very flush connection, so it's able to transfer more efficiently. Now, if Apple went with that for the back of the iPhone as opposed to the bottom, right, with like a MagSafe type connector, they could probably unify the charging interfaces for iPhone and Apple Watch, because you just need a bigger radius rather than a smaller radius. But they could use a very similar type of coil design, potentially increase the wattage to full 18 watts or higher. I mean,
Sure.
potentially. I mean, I'm not an electrical engineer, but it seems like the alignment issues and some of the things could be eliminated. Now, at the same time, I say, you're introducing a lot of problems, because you're talking about an interface that would be only charging. I don't think you'd be able to do data interface on that type of a connector.
Yeah, and I have an idea how they'll get around that. And we already use it, or at least if you own an iPad Pro, actually any of the newer iPads, and it's their smart connector technology, right? It's those 3 little pins. And they're not pins, they're actually pads on the iPad that has like the smart keyboard, has some
Right.
pins that interact, provides data transfer, provides firmware updates. I don't know if you've ever had a smart keyboard prompt you for a firmware update. When Apple first launched the iPad Pro and the smart keyboard cover years ago, within a month or two, there was a software update for the keyboard, and it was all applied through the smart connector. So if you have 3 pins,
I think you're right, Jason. I think they could go with a bigger version of one of these. They could probably get away with QI. They could probably dump QI and decide, you know what, after all this, we did this stuff with AirPower, it's not worth going through the trouble. Let's go with a big one of these in the back of the iPhone, and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting to think of a world with free of wires, right? And remember the upset that was all around and still kind of goes on to this day, where even in reviews, people point out that, yes, this phone has a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. No, this phone doesn't. And I think it's more common now that they don't than they do. But when Apple first took that courageous step, as they like to phrase it, in removing the headphone jack, they did so with another product lined up that was better than what we already had, in that wired headphones were replaced by AirPods. I don't see Apple doing something like this without an AirPod level solution ready to go for it. And that, like we've talked about, it could be the smart connector.
It would have to be as fast as native charging. It would have to still allow for data interface.
Right.
I had just other concerns logistically about it, because I always carry a bigger battery with me. You would still need some type of iPhone. I have to carry a charger cable for this guy that's got a little magnetic connector on it that I connect to a battery, and then I have to have it wrapped around something so it doesn't pop off. It's clunky to do something like that. So I think to have to replace all your batteries to go with some type of special magnetic battery with a lock or something for I don't know. There's and the car accessories that you would need to replace and all that. It's
going to be an expensive endeavor. And when Apple switched from the 30 pin to the Lightning, we went through all of that then. But if this is a strictly wireless standard, which it would have to be, it is going to be a more expensive adoption than what we faced with just the simple Lightning cables. But it's not supposed to happen until 2021. If it does happen, Apple honestly doesn't have the best track record when it comes to wireless charging. AirPower never saw, the public, as well as, reverse wireless charging is a pretty standard feature in high-end Android phones now. That is where the phone itself becomes a wireless charging pad to top off your earbuds or, your watch or whatever it is. It was rumored Apple was going to do that in the 2019 crop of phones, but it didn't happen. So maybe they're having issues because they're working on something bigger and better, or maybe they just are struggling with it, unlike any other company.
Yeah, it is. These are not trivial engineering issues to solve. I mean, we saw the development process for AirPower, what they tried to do, which was so much more complicated than anything any other accessories manufacturer is trying to do. I think there was only really one in the last CES that's been demonstrating a multi interface coil
Era.
where it didn't matter where you put the phone or the device, it would lock onto it no matter what.
Yep.
And even that has got to be very, very difficult to do, for a smaller engineering firm, let alone a company like Apple, which has, $200+ billion in cash, unlimited resources to do. There's only so much with physics you can defy.
Right. Yeah, heat is the biggest culprit when it comes to wireless charging. That is what limits most everything that people do or companies can do with wireless charging in products. It's heat and how you deal with it. There's other issues there, but that's the biggest culprit from my understanding. And the company you're talking about is Era. They
Yep.
actually license their technology. Nomad, which is a producer
Nomad,
of
right? Yeah.
fine quality accessories for all sorts of phones, is going to be one of the first companies, if not the first company, to release the Base Station Pro, which uses Era technology. It can handle up to 3 devices at once. You place anything on there. The Apple Watch is not supported because of that magnetic requirement that you've talked about. But it's really cool tech. I've talked to those guys quite a bit and had a chance to get to really know how it works. And it's interesting stuff. But so let me ask you one last question, Jason. And that is, with the European Union trying to push forward USB-C, do you think that's something that should be adopted everywhere, or do you think companies should be left alone to do what they want?
I think that USB-C is an excellent standard now. I think that, 2-3 years ago when it was first introduced, we had some problems with cables. I think we need to have, better labeling, better certification of the accessories so that we know that they'll work according to specs and standards of all the major manufacturers. When we would, I know that when I go out and buy a USB-C cable from Anchor, it's going to be a solid certified cable that works across all vendors, which is why I standardize on them. When you buy a battery from Anchor or from Belkin or from RAV Power or one of these other major companies or Mophie, that these things are going to work. But the thing is, there's so many fly-by-night companies in China and whatnot that they're iffy. They're half a quarter the price of the major brands, and people go out and buy them thinking they're going to work just fine. They could fry your electronics if they don't do the proper negotiation. And there's a lot of data negotiation that has to occur on that USB-C cable.
Yeah, there
to
is.
prevent. I mean, because you've got a massive amount of wattage leeway. I mean, you can have a little tiny AirPod style case for like my little, I got these little, Anchor earphones, that are, has a USB-C connector, which maybe that uses, I don't know, 5 watts, 2 watts maybe for something like that, versus an iPad Pro, which is like what, 50 watts?
Yeah, you could go up pretty high.
That same cable has to negotiate and say, okay, we're going to go from 5 to 5 watts. Oh, you just connected an iPad Pro. Now we're going to go to 40 watts. Right? But if you send 40 watts into your little iPad Pro case,
yeah, I think there's a lot that would have to be worked out. I don't think it should be a requirement that companies go with USB-C or any other technology for that matter for those reasons. I mean, even when we had micro USB cables were the norm, still had those issues with cheap cables that were prone to overheating and melting and potentially causing a fire. But I think that pretty much covers it. I'm interested to see what Apple does with the portless iPhone. I'm all for it as long as there's an AirPod quality solution for charging and syncing data. That's a real problem people have to solve or use on a daily basis that Apple has to solve. I'm Jason Cipriani.
And I'm Jason Perlow.
This is Jason Squared. Make sure to check out more of our videos at zdnet.com.